Hey everybody, Jason here from Murideo, and today we have a very, very special guest on the podcast, and it is Dave Abrams of Avocal. Dave, how are you?
I'm good, Jason. How are you?
I'm good, man. Great to see you. Are you staying busy? Have you been you been out there calibrating your face off lately? How are things been for you?
We're not, we're not doing a lot of calibrations in the field because of the situation,
Sure.
but I'm staying as busy as ever.
Good.
We're doing a lot of lab work, we're doing a lot of research, a lot of business development stuff, a lot of projects that always get put on the back burner,
Oh yes, yes.
and we're like, let's start working on those things and let's get those tackled. So when we come back,
Yeah.
we're hoping to come back a lot stronger.
Yeah, we're kind of doing the same thing, man. We've been using this time to get caught up on some things and do some things that we've always been meaning to do. So I'm really glad to hear that you're staying busy, man. That's nice to hear. I did want to take a quick second just to say thank you, Dave. I started calibrating 2007 or 8, and at the time there were nowhere near as many resources for new calibrators as there is today. So as a very young green calibrator, I remember reaching out to you. I think I got your name from Joel. He said, talk to Dave, you'll love him, you guys will get along great. And I remember all those years ago, you were real nice to me, and you took all my annoying questions and stuff. So I just want to say thank you, man.
Oh, you're very welcome. We all have to look out for each other, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, I wanted to spend some time with you today, Dave. I mean, we do a lot of podcasts and webcasts and webinars, and we talk so much about calibrating systems, home theater systems, and flat panel TVs and consumer TVs and things like that. And I know you're doing calibration work, but you are the guy that's in the studios in Hollywood and in the post-production facilities. And I thought it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on not only the calibration business, but you're doing such different type of work than what a lot of calibrators are out there doing. I just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit and let the folks that are listening in hear your side of the business and talk about some of the things that you run into in a studio versus maybe in a residential environment. So when you started calibrating, Dave, were you initially doing residential and then moved into studio? What was kind of your backstory?
Yeah, so when I started calibrating, I had taken the ISF class right after graduating high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the summer before I started college for video production in New York. And so I got my ISF training, and then I went off to college to learn about, video systems, video
Sure.
production, editing, scopes, cameras, all of that. And during that time, I started acquiring some gear, right? The first
Mm-hmm.
piece of gear I think I had was the TVS Pro optical comparator,
Oh yeah.
if we all remember that. And then I had a Sencor, I think it was the CP290 color
Mm-hmm.
analyzer. I can't believe I remember that model.
Yeah.
And slowly, while I was at college, I was posting on forums. There were forums like the AVS forum and the Home Theater
Mm-hmm.
Spot and the Home Theater Forum. And there was a bunch of places people were sharing knowledge, and I'd go on there to learn and to share. And every so often, I'd get inquiries about calibration. So I started actually as a side business doing calibrations for the home theater enthusiast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your AVS Forum user, your Home Theater Spot user,
Sure.
driving on the weekends from college to go do a calibration and come back and resume my studies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of, it starts out slow. Any business starts out a little slow. I think my first year I had like 5 customers. And, the next year you're like, oh, now I have 20 or 30 customers. And
Right.
keep in mind, it was a part-time thing for me because I was in college full time.
Sure.
But by the time I got out of college, I had teamed up with, if you may remember, Eliab Alvarez de la Campa.
Mm-hmm.
Eliab was a calibrator out of New Jersey. I was in New York. We had met at an ISF class in Long Island and hit it off and just said, why don't we just work together?
Yeah.
Why don't we just make one business and service customers in New York, in New Jersey, and kind of represent one solid front? And we did that from about 2000, 2001 until 2008 when Eliab
Mm-hmm.
decided to leave the industry. But during that time, we built up a following and a reputation among that home theater enthusiast crowd, which then sort of led into catching the attention of some more professionals.
Mm-hmm.
CEDIA dealers was probably the next step, moving over to the CEDIA crowd, the custom installer crowd, where
Mm-hmm.
dealers would subcontract us to do calibrations. I'm sure you do a lot of that as well in
Mm-hmm.
Florida.
Yep.
They call you up, they have a projector, they want you to calibrate or a display.
Sure.
And I had the opportunity during all of that to work with Joe Kane out here in
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles and
Oh,
in
that's awesome.
Hollywood, right after college. So after college, Eliab kind of stayed on the East Coast, and I moved out to the West Coast, and we
Mm-hmm.
always joke, we're like, we're bi-coastal now.
Yeah, right,
We
right.
have a New York office and an LA office, and
Yeah.
we've got this covered. We've got two major markets covered. And I worked with Joe Kane full time, and then part time built up the business out here. Now Joe had a lot of the studio connections,
Mm-hmm.
and so while working for Joe, he was more of a consultant, a teacher, a trainer, a researcher, not really
Mm-hmm.
the person that's going to necessarily go out and do the day-to-day calibration. But the studios would call. They'd say,
Mm-hmm.
Joe, we don't want to do this. We don't understand this. Can you please come out and do something, take care of this room for us, or take care of this bay, or work with
Sure.
us? And Joe would just say, I don't really do that, but I'll put you forward to Dave. Dave's in
Mm-hmm.
my office. He's great. He'll get you taken care of. Well, it was a blessing and a curse, right? Because I got so busy that
Yeah.
eventually that became my full-time job. And I'm still very good friends with Joe and everything, and he
Mm-hmm.
did a ton for me, and I have a lot of respect for him. But it did become a full-time job, so I moved full-time into the calibration market out here when that got big enough. And now I'd probably say 60 to 70% of the work is post-production,
Mm-hmm.
is broadcasting post-production. The other 20, 25% high-end installers, high-end home theater, your CEDIA
Mm-hmm.
crowd, and then the rest are end users. We still get the end users that call and want calibration services. But as you were saying, there is quite a difference between calibrating for the end user, calibrating
Mm-hmm.
for the dealer, and calibrating really for the post-production company. One of the things that we struggle with at times is how fast can you do the job?
Oh,
Because
sure.
when you go into those studios, those are rooms, these color bays, especially with the artists, they're renting from several $100s an hour to several $1,000s an hour, depending on the studio, the equipment in there, and the reputation of that colorist. Now you
Mm-hmm.
go in to calibrate that, you're taking that room down.
Yeah.
How long is that room going to be down? How long are they not going to be earning on that room? So we like to get in and be efficient, but also get it as good as we can, as quality
Mm-hmm.
calibration as we can, as accurate as we possibly can, and we like to pride ourselves on that.
Right.
But there is this higher stress level of, okay,
Oh,
I'm in
sure.
here at 8 a.m. and they're telling me I got to be out at noon, and if something goes wrong or something doesn't go right, or I have to start over, or I'm not happy with my results, then I have to figure out how I'm going to make this time up and hit their deadline, because they have sessions and they have business they need to conduct. With a
Mm-hmm.
consumer, we can usually take the time we need, and most enthusiasts especially are like, take all the time. I want as
Yeah.
perfect as can be. Whatever you need, if you got to come back, come back. If you don't got,
Yeah. Right.
which is really nice to really really fine tune your skills and really hone in on the ultimate accuracy of that particular project.
Mm-hmm. Have you? I know with some enthusiasts I've dealt with who are real power users and they really get into this stuff. I've been in people's homes before, 6 hours, midnight, 2 a.m. even sometimes,
Yeah.
because you're exactly right, man. The enthusiast wants to sit down there with you on the couch and see everything that you're doing and learn. And personally, I love that kind of stuff. When I schedule a private job at someone's home, I'm usually booking about like 4 hours or so. And that's in case some of the things that you mentioned, you have to start over, you're not happy with the results, there's some weird thing, you have to start from scratch, whatever. In a studio environment, if you're gonna do maybe an editing bay with 2 or 3 monitors, are you still thinking about, in that 2 to 4 hour range, or do you tend to book less or more time depending on the panels? Because I've noticed in the few professional panels that I've dealt with, and there's a lot more to it as far as signal chain and stuff like that goes, of course, but sitting down in front of like a Sony or a Canon monitor, it's like they usually dial in so easily and so nicely. So I was curious on the time that you usually book for some of these jobs. Is it about the same?
It depends. You kind of find your time, just like you said, you have about 4 hours on, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, a standard TV, and we'll have our timetables for different displays. So we might say a Sony HX310, which is kind of the hot Sony reference model right now. It replaced the BVMX300. We
Mm-hmm.
can do one of those from setup to teardown in about 3 hours or less. It can be faster, but it depends on what the customer needs. Now, if a customer
Sure.
wants HD calibrated Rec 709, that's one calibration. They want
Mm-hmm.
DCI P3 for cinema content, that's another calibration. They want HDR, that's another calibration. So,
sure.
so that's where some of it comes into play in terms of the time gets longer, even on the same product. And then on top of that, with newer displays such as the HX310, when you're going from SDR to HDR, it's not an instant, this panel is now stable. So we might shift from 100 nits to 1,000 nits, and it might take 15, 20, 30 minutes before that becomes stable enough for you to actually measure it. So now you're adding that time in. So maybe I can work faster if I was just working faster, but I won't be getting the accuracy that I want to get because I'm now fighting against a panel that's heating up or cooling down. What we've tried to do to be efficient and be effective, because ultimately time is money for all of us calibrators out there. A lot of times we're charging flat rates. A lot of times those flat rates are X per monitor or X for the project. And if you spend 100 hours for that X, right, your hourly rate goes down, your profitability goes down. So we try to be very conscious with that. And what we've tried to do is optimize our process. So at times you can actually see behind me, I have 2 sets of CR300s and CR100s here. I'm actually measuring these monitors, but I took all the cables out for the webinar here, so it's not ugly behind me. But we'll take multiple systems now. So let's say you have an LG OLED, which is very common as a review monitor or client monitor in these color-based, the large format monitor. And we'll do a 3D lookup table. And that requires taking a bunch of measurements, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000, and that takes time. So maybe what we do is we set up on that and we get that going while we start working on the other one. So we'll have 2 sets of gear running in the same room to kind of leapfrog what we can do. You can't do that all the time because not every display has these breaks where the system's kind of on autopilot or warming up or cooling down. But if you can, it really helps to minimize that time, get you in and out faster, and allows you to do a better job. So there is a lot of focus that we've tried to work on setting up and tearing down very quickly. We're currently my guy Michael, who Michael Hamilton. We've been even before he started, I was trying to redo my mobile toolkits, and we're trying to make these kits that can be set up and teared down in 5 minutes or less. And keep in mind, we carry our own mobile cellular network, routers, VPN system for all of our gear. So it's a lot of gear, multiple generators for different types of things, from serial digital to HDMI to Dolby Vision. So there's a lot of stuff. And so we're trying to get it so we can roll it in, pop it open, be up and running in 5 minutes, tear down in 5 minutes, and then the rest of it's just calibration versus, I'm sure you need to set up sometimes. It can take you 20 or 30 minutes just to get all your gear set up, the meters aligned,
sometimes
everything going. So it's how quick can you get that? How fast can you make the process while still maintaining that accuracy, that customer service, answering the customer's questions, doing customer review, all of that plays into it as well.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. You touched on something interesting, bringing your own router and your own hotspot and stuff. When you're in a customer's home, you just jump on the Wi-Fi or you jump on the network and you're good to go. But in a professional studio or a Hollywood type place, there's probably some guest network shenanigans and stuff like that. So you're bringing your own network and doing everything. That's awesome.
So we were finding this really started happening, I think, around the time of the LG OLED becoming more prevalent. When we do digital cinema projectors, pretty much all of them are connected over a network, have a network interface, whether it's a Barco with Barco Communicator, which is its own app, or it's a Christie with its own web app. You need to get onto that network. And a lot of the studios understand that about those products. And so they'll let you on kind of the maintenance network or the guest network to maintenance that projector. But when you start going from edit bay to edit bay to edit bay, and you have LG OLEDs or a Panasonic OLED that have network interfaces that you communicate over the network to calibrate, we started finding that studios, first off, they don't want to let you on their regular network. They're very, there's a lot of regulations on the networks that touch data. And a lot of those networks that touch data don't even have internet. So you don't want to be on them anyway if you want to be like texting your friends and doing your emails. So they won't let you on those. And they don't usually put displays on those per se, like things with Internet of Things devices, they're very finicky about. And what we found was the ports on the guest networks were blocking us from connecting to like LGs.
Oh, sure.
So we were in a studio that had I want to say 43 LG OLEDs and 43
Oh,
edit bays a couple years ago. They were replacing
yeah.
all their Panasonic plasmas, and they said, we want all
Mhm.
these calibrating. We were like, okay, we're going to do the LUTs, we're going to do the whole process. And we get there and we spend about half a day, maybe more than half a day, trying to find the IT guy to allow us
Oh,
to get it, those ports unblocked to get in. At that
oh
point, I said,
man.
this doesn't really work for us anymore because it's
Yeah.
burning too much time and resources. And if you're a customer and you're bringing in someone like, us, you or I, our job is to make it as seamless and easy for the
Yeah.
customer.
Should
So
look
when
like
you walk
magic.
in and you say, hey, I need access to your internet, and oh, you're blocking these ports, can you unblock those for me? You become high maintenance.
Yeah.
And these people are working and they have to-do lists and it's their job. And
Mhm.
it might not be the same feel as the enthusiast who wants to learn everything, who's happy to learn what you're doing and understand what you're doing and why. They're
Mhm.
like, I just need this calibrated, man, and I need it
Yeah.
done by 5 o'clock. So
Yeah.
let's make that happen. So we started bringing our own. We started testing a lot of hotspots and routers and Wi-Fi systems, and we've settled on a system that we really like that seems to work very well. Sometimes you don't have cellular data,
Hmm.
which is a problem, and we have a system that's redundant where if they'll let us into, if we need internet, we can plug into their guest and we create an encrypted tunnel, and so they can't do the port blocking. We'll put the LG on it, and it bypasses any port blocking on the guest network and things like that. So a little more information we probably need to go into, but
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
we tested a lot of systems to see like, well, what if we don't have internet, but they'll give us guest,
Sure.
Ethernet access? Can we make this work? And sure enough, we tested it one studio that was very highly secure and it was able to work. And we were like, okay, if we can work here, we can work anywhere.
Yeah. You're good now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so common now. And it's so cool to hear that you've got that figured out. More and more TVs now, to be able to talk to them, you have to be on a network or something. And that sounds like a really difficult challenge, especially if you're in a cave somewhere with no cellular service. But that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, I wanted to touch on this a little bit because a lot of folks out there might not be familiar with this. You mentioned the LG OLED used as a client monitor. So
Mm-hmm.
my understanding is that you have somebody doing color grading or maybe doing editing, and they're working in a bay, and they're looking at their dead on what's called perfectly calibrated professional monitors. That client monitor, is that for them to just kind of make sure that on a consumer display everything's still going to look right? What's the whole deal with the client monitor?
So client monitor or review monitor, as they might call it, when a colorist is working, they're generally working at a desk, at a console. They have all their, they have their. I guess you'd call it a console, right? Or
Mhm.
these workstations. I'm blanking on the name, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. With all their
Yeah,
knobs and dials to
all the
do their
knobs
color
and
grading.
dials and spinny
Yeah,
things and lights
exactly.
and yeah.
Their console, and they'll have usually a hero monitor, what we call reference grade monitor, grade A monitor, sometimes referred to if it meets those qualifications of a grade A reference monitor. And those monitors are generally 25 to 30 inches, around that
Yeah.
range. And so it's a small monitor, right? So you get a producer, a director, various people coming in to look at the content and give their artistic input. Well, you don't want everyone huddling around you on your desk looking at this 30-inch monitor. It's very
Mm.
uncomfortable. And the smaller the monitors are, sometimes the harder to see some of the things you want to see in the image.
Sure.
So they'll put a larger monitor in the room, a larger format monitor, which we often refer to as the client monitor or the review monitor. And what that's meant for is for that group to come in the room, for other people to come in the room, look at the larger monitor and give their feedback. Now, ideally, this is a grade A monitor. Ideally, this matches the grading monitors perfectly as possible.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, when you start to get to those larger format monitors, there really aren't many broadcast quality grade A review monitors in the 50, 55, 65-inch range. That doesn't mean they're not coming. There are some manufacturers talking about bringing some to market right now, but
Wow.
at the moment, there aren't any that are really as good as those 30-inch monitors that we've been using today. And so how do we get the best match? And if we're talking about SDR, monitors have evolved quite a bit with Rec 709 and standard dynamic range, where we can get consumer monitors, not just LG, but many consumer monitors, to match really, really close
Yeah.
to perceptually to a reference monitor for Rec 709. Where we run into these issues now today is with high dynamic range, right? So
Mhm.
as you get brighter and you're pushing these monitors into higher light output levels, and you're working with larger color volumes and you want to do larger color volumes at higher output levels, you start to run into issues. And also just thermal issues, clamping issues, where, you know, one monitor can do 1,000 nits, but one monitor can only do 700 nits of luminance and those kinds of things, or 2,000 nits and one monitor can do 1,000 nits. And so we run into these issues with perceptual matching and finding the right monitors. And for a long time, plasmas were the go-to client monitor because they have good off-axis viewing, good contrast. You're going to have 3, 4, 5 people in this room. They're not going to be sitting in the exact same spot. They want to be seeing the same image. And with a lot of LCDs, you start getting off axis, you start seeing saturation issues, contrast issues, et cetera. And so that kind of made those a deal breaker. The plasma owned the market for a very long time, and as plasma went away, people were looking for the next best thing. And the next best thing started to become the WRGB OLED made by LG Display. A number of manufacturers make them. If you know, on the affordable side, we're looking at LG. On the slightly less affordable side, we're looking at Panasonic. We see those in the studios too. And then on the upper tier, we see Flanders Scientific.
Oh, nice.
Scientific's a broadcast monitor maker. They have a WRGB OLED that they use in post-production. We do see it. One of the things people like about it is it has a broadcast backend, right? So it has serial digital in. You can do 1D LUTs, 3D LUTs. You can do like a pre-1D LUT, a 3D LUT, a post-1D LUT. You can do a lot of customization to it. You can push the panel a little harder than some of the other manufacturers might allow you to push the panel, because they know that you want to do it. They have a setting to kind of put it in overdrive mode. So, but you know, again, you're paying a little bit more for that. Hey, I've got serial digital in. I've got some of these broadcast features, scopes built into the monitor, where you can turn on the waveform on our vector scope on the monitor, so you can see what you're seeing on the monitor. Those kinds of things are very, very appealing to a lot of colorists in those rooms. So those are the three that we're really seeing predominantly here in the Hollywood post-production community. LG being dominant because of the cost effectiveness of it, right? The lower cost makes it a lot more enticing. It makes it larger to it makes it available to a much larger customer base in terms of budgets.
So, something I've read about now for a couple of years, and I haven't had a chance to ever poke around with this because I've never had in front of me a true RGB OLED. So like the Sony, for example. So we've read a lot in the past. I'm sure you've got tons of experience with this, which is why I'm curious to ask you, when you have a technology like the LG OLED being WRGB versus an RGB OLED monitor, there's some perceptual differences between the two. And I know there's been some tricks in the past, like the Judd mod and things like that. So you know, what happens when you're looking at one type of technology versus another type of technology, and they don't quite match each other? Do you have to come up with like the Judd offset? Is that sort of the answer to that?
We'd love to say there's a silver bullet answer, right? Oh, this one white point or this one color matching model, color matching function fits everything, but it doesn't work that way. But it doesn't work that way, right? Every spectral power distribution is different. And what's tricky about WRGB OLED is its spectral power changes, which most displays don't. You think, oh, I have an RGB display, red plus green plus blue equals white. Well, not on a WRGB OLED. White plus green plus blue could equal white, or white plus red plus green could equal white. So now your spectral power has changed based on what you're using to make up your image. Now, it's also dynamic, right? So the amount of what is referred to, I think, in the industry as white boost coming from the WRGB OLED. If you're below certain nit levels, there might not be any white subpixel being used. And as you get up into higher nit levels, the white subpixel starts to come into play to give it that white boost. So now you're working with this very dynamic color volume, this very dynamic system that is very hard to predict. And the unpredictability of it is what makes it very difficult to calibrate and get consistent results. Light space and color space now have a volumetric probe matching function that they developed specifically for displays like this, where they can, instead of when you calibrate your colorimeter to a spectral radiometer, we often use a matrix model where you measure red, green, blue, white, and you calculate a corrective matrix, right? To get those in sync. Well, with WRGB OLED, those aren't quite sufficient. So Steve and the Light Illusion team came up with a volumetric model. LG released a model called the Bodner method,
Mm-hmm.
I believe they're calling it the Bodner method.
Yep.
Calman 2020 just introduced that in the Calman 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It's on my list of to-dos to play around with. I do have an LG C9 sitting right behind the computer here.
Oh, nice.
And I do want to play around with that Bodner method here in the next week and sort of see how well that is. But a lot of these companies that make calibration software are starting to adapt to these monitors that have these different spectral power additions or color volume characteristics, however you want to call it, to try and get more accurate results throughout that color volume, because we do have inherent errors if we don't have the tools that can accurately measure against what they're doing.
Sure. One of the things that we've always preached in classes, and everybody who deals with displays knows that over a certain amount of time, the display will drift and you have to touch it up and sometimes recalibrate. Now, in a residential environment, in a home environment, we'll recommend, once a year, once every other year. Depends on the customer. Some customers are real particular. They want it to be perfect all the time. So we'll visit them every year or so. Some customers have the thing calibrated once, you never hear from them again. So in your world where those monitors are running like 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, are you finding yourself going in and doing maintenance every few months, or how does that work?
It depends on the customer and it depends on the technology, right?
Yeah.
So technology 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when it was the CRT, let's say, the CRT drifted faster, right? So,
Yes.
So you put 1,000 hours on it, you measure where it was at the calibration 1,000 hours prior, and then you measure 1,000, you go, oh, it's drifted, and we can measure this drift, and we have this much delta. Now you take maybe an LCD today, a broadcast LCD, and you measure it 1,000 hours later, and those deltas are going to be smaller. It's going to have drifted less because technology keeps improving. It keeps becoming more stable. These manufacturers, they're not unaware of this, right? They know Hey, we need to get displays more stable, more consistent, more uniform. And we do see over time that happening. So there are, to answer your question, there are customers with things like digital cinema xenon lamps that need more maintenance, so we're in there more often. And then there are customers with other displays that drift faster. WRGB OLED, RGB OLED will drift faster. We're finding than some of the LCDs on the market. So we might be in those color bays a little more often than we're in the color bays with some of the LCDs. And I think over time, we're going to see the intervals between calibration services become longer. So for people running businesses like you and I, we need to make sure we have a larger customer base, so that rotation rotation keeps us busy, because I think, if you're going back to customer A every 3 months and that becomes every 6 months or every 8 months or every year, that now you need more customers to fill in those gaps that you didn't have that repeat business. But in broadcast, they're also upgrading a lot, which is very nice to see. They amortize products. I mean, the smaller shops, if they have the money, they'll upgrade just because they want to upgrade. Like I have colors that are like, there's this new monitor. It might be a little bit better than last year's monitor. Like, you just bought this thing last year, and they go, I don't care. I'll sell that thing, and I'll just get the
I'll
new
sell
one.
it. Yeah.
And so they're calling you up all the time because they're constantly upgrading. But the larger companies are amortizing every 2 to 5 years, is what I'm seeing, and they're also not usually doing the large studios usually do sections of the studios. So you'll see a large studio saying, well, our marketing department's getting the upgrade this year, and then our feature film department's getting the upgrade this year, and then our TV department's getting the upgrade this year. And so they're kind of rolling that out. So they're also getting to see how it works. So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket, upgrading the entire thing, going, wow, this monitor was the biggest mistake we ever made.
Bad choice. And,
exactly.
That I was curious because if you look at like a LG or a Sony OLED in the consumer world, somebody's watching it 4 hours a day, it's not getting all that much use. So you might revisit that guy 3, 4, 5 years from then. But at that point, 3, 4, 5 years in the consumer world, there's going to be a TV that's 10 times better probably. So when I first started hearing about the studios using the LG OLED as a client monitor, was going back to the 7 series, so like 2017, that year. Are some of the studios still holding on to those 7s, or are they going like to the 8 and 9? Are they upgrading every year, or are they holding on to them for a couple of years?
So when every little bit of accuracy is important, with monitors that are on the lower cost side, they are holding on. Some studios are holding on to it. Like if they have a 7 series, they're using the 7 series. But I'm seeing a lot of studios that had 7s going to 9s or thinking about 20s, and we've certainly seen a lot of that. And they might trickle that down from like this was in the color bay, now it's in the edit bay.
Oh, sure.
So it was an online, now it's an offline, and now we put the new one in the online. So we do see some of that trickle down where they're pushing it down the line and getting the newer, better stuff into the color grading systems. But I think once they hit a point where they're very, very happy with it, they're going to hold on to it for a while. We don't usually see people upgrading every year when they're very happy with it. HDR is so new,
right?
And the improvements have been very noticeable for the broadcasters, what you can do and the increased image processing and the increased capabilities. I can tell you on the C10, there's an option now where you can set the HDR to P3D65, which is only used in mastering content, right? It's not a standard for us at home. When we get HDR at home, it's in Rec 2020.
Right.
But when they're mastering content, they choose what space they want to work in, and they'll say, oh, this display can only hit P3 color. So I will work with P3 color. And then when I'm done, I'll move that into Rec 2020 during my authoring process, right? I'll do my transform from one color space to the other. With the 2019, the 2018, you had to go into an app and load a custom color space matrix and do some hodgepodging, black magic to make it work. And now, the C10 or CX, whatever they're calling about the 2020 LG, they're making it into some kind of menu where we can now access it without having to do those kind of commands to do that. So I think studios looking for those kind of features and functionality go, ooh, that's something we wanted. That's going to make life better. Let's upgrade that and get rid of these. And those types of things will make them upgrade faster than not.
Are you seeing, so obviously you're seeing the editing bays and the workstations and things like that. Are you also getting into like the screening rooms where they come in the morning and look at the dailies and things like that? Are you working in those rooms too, or just the workstations?
No, we work on them all. I've got video game developers. We work on game development monitors for the graphic artists. We work on VFX monitors, again, mostly computer monitors for the VFX artists, edit monitors, on-set monitors, screening rooms. Screening rooms are interesting because a lot of the work on these digital cinema projectors, if you've worked on some of them, I know we've talked about this before, Jason, is the configuration and the initial setup. Right. So you have to, like on a Barco, they call them macros. On a Christie, they call them channels. And you're configuring, channel 1 is going to be this. And you choose everything. You say it's Rec 709, it's 444 RGB, it's 2.4 gamma, it's this lamp memory, and you create all your lamp memories, and you do your focus and your corner focus and lamp alignment, and you get all this stuff done. Now, once all your macros or channels and these projectors are set up, the maintenance on the color and the light is very easy. So a lot of studios are buying basic gear. We're teaching some of our clients how to do it. Some of them know how to do it, and so they're buying their own spectroradiometer and they're shooting them between sessions, or they're shooting them once a week because the lamps, they are less stable. They do drift a little faster. I don't think you necessarily need every week, but if you have the gear and you're charging the kind of money that you're charging and you're doing these Hollywood blockbusters, let's make sure every Monday we are still in our spec and we're still ready to go. There are a couple studios that have even automated the process. I know one studio that owns CR300s, Color Image Research CR300s, and they have them permanently mounted in each room. And they have a script that turns on the projector, waits a certain amount of time, calls up the patterns, shoots it, and updates the measured color gamut data files and sets the lamp file before their sessions. So they can start that at like 6 a.m. and by 8 a.m. when the guy comes in, it's been warmed up, it's been shot, it's ready for the day, all automated. And their internal development team built the software, the internal development team did the whole thing. But we're seeing a little bit of that because accuracy is so important to them in their rooms. But, those CR300s are, what are they, 18,000 retail?
Something like
that. I mean, so you're talking one per room, permanently mounted. You got to have a little bit of money to, and then you're building out your software and your major studios.
You're paying somebody to write the scripts and everything. That's cool.
Yeah, but they look at it as, hey, it's peace of mind. We can say it was calibrated every day. We have the data. We can track drift. We can track all this stuff historically, and they are doing that. They're tracking all of that over time.
I guess when the movie has $100 million, budget or something, then throwing a meter in there to measure it every day is probably not a bad idea.
Sure.
They one thing that I can only imagine how this has been in the past few years with the introduction of HDR. But if I'm looking at one of those client monitors like on an OLED and the HDR is displaying relatively, close to what it should be, but then you go into a screening room with a projector, and now you're starting to see where projectors are kind of struggling with the light output to keep up with the HDR. So what happens when you're looking at an HDR OLED image and then you look at an HDR projection image and they don't match up at all? Like, that's got to be just weird. What are you guys doing in those situations?
Whew. So the first thing, I think the best thing to do in those situations when you're taking something that was mastered on a monitor, let's say most HDR content's at least 1,000 nits. There's a good amount of 1,000 nit content, 4,000 nit content. There's some content at 3,000 nits. There's a Flanders Scientific monitor at 3,000 nits. There's some content on that.
Huh.
And there's some content on prototype displays, like Dolby had a couple higher nit level displays floating around that I think people were experimenting with. So you take 1,000 nits and something with a lot of contrast like an OLED or a light modulated cell layer LCD, which is where a lot of these broadcast monitors are going. And then you go to a projector. And it's not that the projector might not have contrast, it's that it doesn't have the contrast of that flat panel. An OLED is almost infinite. It can turn off and it can turn on. A projector, you put black up, and on most projectors, you're going to see it's not perfectly black. So you lose the contrast. But then if you try to get your light output up to match, let's say you have a projector that can do 1,000 nits, your black floor, your perceptual black floor is now very high. Blacks are very washed out because you have this ambient light from the projector that doesn't turn off, that is still in the room. So my argument to, or my approach to it, I should say, is we try to educate the customer of the limitations of what that's going to entail, right? Hey, we're taking something mastered for one medium and we're trying to show it on another medium. We have something meant for TVs that can do at least 1,000 nits, and we have something not really mastered for projection at all that you're now trying to show it on a projector. And then if you have the right conditions and the right image processing, though, it can look pretty good. I don't want to say I've seen some HDR, and I've set up some HDR systems for home theaters where I'm going, whoa, that looks amazing, and just blow away quality. And then I've done some where I have to tell the client, sadly, you just can't do it. It's not going to look good. And a lot of those times that comes into a projector with either poor contrast or the screen is too big for the projector to really do HDR. That's very common. Yeah. So if you only have, let's say you're only doing, I like to say nits now. Everyone's kind of moved to nits. We used to say 14-foot Lamberts or 48 nits, but let's say, 48 nits, which is kind of the lowest you'd want to be, 14-foot Lamberts in a home theater projector for SDR content even. But that's with your projector maxed out. It cannot go any brighter. Now you're going to show HDR on that. It's not going to look as impressive because you're taking a range, an SDR range of this, and you're showing it, maybe like this, let's say. And then you're taking that same amount of light output and you're taking HDR, which has a much larger range, squeezing it down to the same range. It's just going to look a little darker and dimmer and more, people like to say, muddy. It doesn't look as punchy and as impressive. But if you have a projector that you can watch it, 14 to 20-foot Lamberts, let's say, for SDR, but you can get 30 to 35-foot Lamberts for HDR, and you have a good quality room, and you have, so you're pushing out maybe 100 nits for HDR.
Right.
And you have a good quality room, and you have good contrast, and you have good tone mapping, which is very important, which is, the conversion essentially of the 1,000 nits to the 100 nits. The mapping of the tone response curve. If you have that, it can look very impressive. Even though you have these compromises that you're making of, I'm only watching 1,000 nits, 100 nits, and that's, 1/10, but gosh, this still looks very impressive because you have that delineation between what you're watching your SDR at, what you're watching your HDR at. On top of that, if you can keep the color gamut more accurate, that's impressive too. But I know you and I have talked about this, and Chris Deering, who I know we talk about it a lot.
Sure.
When you have a projector and you want to hit wider color, whether it's Rec 2020 color, P3D65 color, anything wider than Rec 709, which is our SDR system, we're now looking at often a loss of light, because a lot of projectors will put a filter in. Not all of them, but a lot of them will put a filter in. Now that filter comes in, you get wider color. You're getting that closer to HDR color that's on that, content, but you're losing so much light.
It kills your light.
You get your light up bright enough to have it be HDR, and the argument becomes, well, would I rather have the range? Would I rather have 100 nits or let's say 30-foot Lamberts with Rec 709 color and just tone map my HDR color down to 709? So I'm not really getting that color fidelity, but I'm getting the range. Or do I try to get the color fidelity without the range?
Right.
Pretty much the consensus among people that I've talked to is, the range is more important than the color fidelity, because it'll just look dark and muddy if you don't have the range, right? But but if you can have both, then you're in an awesome. Then those are the systems where I go, yeah, I could live with this. This is really good.
What are things like laser modulation? I wouldn't imagine that would help too much with getting brighter, but does that help at least with the blacks and help with the contrast?
It can. Often these projectors that are laser based are newer, and often newer projectors have better contrast in general. But yeah, we're seeing laser certainly as a pro on a lot of those in terms of hitting the color as well as getting better contrast. Anytime when I'm speccing a home theater, if someone comes to me beforehand and says, hey, a lot of the CDA dealers will do this, they'll say, Dave, we got this job. Here's the size screen. Here's the dimensions. What should we put in here? We try to find something where we can dim it down enough to hit SDR and then crank it up enough. And with laser, you often have a lot more range than a lamp, because lamps can only dim so much. So you might be able to go 30% or 40% down from max light, but on a laser, you could go, from 100% down to 30%. So you could go 70% down from max. So now you've got more range to allow you to hit that SDR light output while also cranking it up for that HDR light output. And it sort of fits those needs for those SDR, HDR theaters a little bit better.
It seems like laser is like, it seems like we're almost to like, I don't know if this sounds weird or not. It seems like we're almost at the pinnacle for projectors today. I mean, I know like in the Dolby theater, for example, at least the couple that I've been to, they're using, if I remember correctly, they're using like a 6 laser Christie double stack, just the size of my first apartment type of type of projectors in those situations. At least we saw the Dolby theater in Scottsdale, the one here in Tampa. They're using those, I believe. Are you seeing any of those? Are any of the studios using those real crazy big, expensive, powerful commercial projectors for a screening room? Is that even being talked about?
So the studios for screening rooms for digital cinema are using digital cinema projectors.
They are.
Some of them are using RGB laser. Yes. The stuff you're seeing at the Dolby Cinema is pretty much reserved for Dolby.
Yeah.
It's manufactured, I believe, by Christie for Dolby, in conjunction with Dolby. And they're using 6 DMDs, right? So 6 DLP devices. And 3 of them are for luminance modulation, some rudimentary understanding of it. And then the other 3 are for the actual like image. And so they're able to deflect the light out of the cavity before you get into the main engine, essentially, to attenuate the light down even more, right? That ambient light, because the lasers and the lamps, they don't turn off completely.
Right.
There's always some light coming in there because there's always some pixel that's pretty much on.
Sure.
And it's not a per pixel system, right? It's light that's hitting the chip, and then the chip is reflecting out. Yeah. Whereas with something like an OLED, right, each pixel is being individually controlled or modulated. And so what we're seeing now is Christie has a projector called the Eclipse, and Nigel and the AVS Forum guys put on a demo with Christie right before COVID lockdown here in LA. I think it was in February. At Christie, I got to go to the demo. It was extremely impressive.
Oh yeah.
It's meant for home theater. I don't know the cost. I know it's several $100,000.
I'm sure.
In a small car. Yeah. They didn't really tell us cost at the time. They said, if you're serious, contact us. We'll get you a quote. You can do your pre-orders. But it's 6 DMDs, RGB laser, and when they went to black, the room was black.
That's yeah.
Look back and say, is this on? And it was on, but it was really, really, really dark.
Yeah.
And it got really, really, really bright. And so I see that technology, it's now rolling out to the very high-end home theaters where people have that kind of money to spend and have that kind of space to put such a large projector in their booth. We'll see that. And what I'm looking forward to is smaller form factors of that. And also, I've been talking to Chrissy, I've been talking to Barco. I'm like, guys, 2-chip. And they're all like, yes, we are working on a 2-chip version. So think of a single chip DLP with that extra chip for the luminance.
Sure.
And maybe something around 5,000 lumens. If we could get that, that's smaller form factor, 2-chip. I like single chip projectors in terms of their sharpness and the fact that we don't have to converge them.
Right.
They're always a little sharper because convergence, no matter how much you put on it, there's always, if you get up on that screen and you're really looking at those test patterns, you'll see a little hair. And we're talking like a hair, but you'll
nothing.
See, and then you think, how does that translate to the image? If you have a single chip, now you've got that. There is none of that. You put really quality lensing on it, and for a lot of home theaters, I think, vast majority of home theaters I do are 15 feet and under in terms of width of screen. They don't need a 6-chip Christie that can do an 80-foot wide screen at home. You're definitely going to be under driving that projector.
It's like putting a Hayabusa motor into a smart car or something like that. It's just like, whoa. One of the big challenges that we are always faced with in residential is room lighting, ambient light, screen sizes, and things like that. I would imagine that in your situation, you're going into like perfectly treated, under control lighting environments, probably acoustically treated. I mean, are these screening rooms like engineered to death and really planned out?
It depends on the purpose of the room. So for the grading rooms for cinema, a lot of them are strictly that, grading rooms. They're not meant to mix the audio. And so there's audio in there, but they're often non-perforated screens with speakers around the screen, which audio guys would say, oh no, that's terrible. You can't put the center speaker below the center of the screen.
No way.
But the guys in there are like, we're not listening to the audio. We're going frame by frame, color grading this content. And then someone comes in and, people, it's that aspect of bringing you more into the content. So when they do the client reviews, when those producers and directors come in and sit down for the grading, they want to hear what they're watching when they play through it. They don't want to just watch voiceless content. So they have some speakers there, but in those rooms, a lot of them are very simple and very specific. They're dark gray, SMPTE spec with a Stort Snowmat or Studio Tech 100 screen, non-perforated, very, very simple, if you will. And there's not a lot of sources. There's no need for a lot. There's not like, oh, we have a Blu-ray and an Apple TV and a Roku and the PlayStation.
You're not doing that.
It's not like that. It's like, well, we have the system and then we have our DCP server where we can play back authored content, and that's sometimes all there is. In those systems. So they're very easy to set up, I should say, like comparatively. And often those projectors are in booths, which is great because, as you know, you go to these homes, sometimes they're on the ceiling, you're on a ladder, you're crawling in a crawl space because they're in a soffit. You go in these studios and you walk right into the booth and it's on a table and you're like, oh, I got to level it. And you're looking through the port glass, which is gigantic. And you can see as you crank the foot, it moving on the screen instead of you being, unable to see through the glass because the lens is all that can fit in the glass. So, and I actually had a job for an end user, Sony VPL VW5000, earlier this year in Century City. And there was the theater and then the soffit, and you had to go in the room behind the theater. You walk out a hall, you go down, you go around, and then it was on like almost like a morgue tray, right? You'd pull the tray out, adjust the feet, push the tray back in, then have to go in the theater and see how close you got it. So it was like half a day just to get the geometry as perfect as we could. Now I did bring Michael, and he was on a walkie-talkie. We saved a little time because he could tell me no more. Exactly.
That's funny. I would imagine that some of these Hollywood types, especially the guys that are on the production side, are a lot of these guys kind of audiophiles and videophiles themselves and have big systems at home that are kind of reference quality. Do you see that a lot?
Some do. Producers, directors. There's a program. I don't think it's referred to it anymore as it, but it used to be called the Bel Air Circuit. I think I think they might just call it the Circuit, or there's a new name.
Yeah.
And what it is it's essentially Hollywood A-listers able to get first run movies at home. So they're getting the DCPs at home.
Right.
And you have to get approval. Each studio has to approve. You have to apply to each studio that you want content from. It's an individual thing. You pay into it. And, if you're, a producer, a director, actor, celebrity, even someone just influential, like you're an investor in Universal Studios, you might be able to get in it, right? And they drop off the DCP, or now they have their server system that they can drop down the DCP to you, and you can watch it. They give you a key, and you can watch it for maybe 24 hours at home. And so we're seeing really reference grade home theaters in that community, in the movers and shakers. Now, the editors, colorists, they're all very astute to it, and they all have some kind of system, from what I understand. We go to some of their homes because they're like, you got to do my home TV, man. But it may be just like me and you. It might just be like an LG OLED or a Sony OLED or a Samsung LCD, and they're watching their standard TV at home, and we calibrate, and they have their standard surround system in their multi-purpose living room. So it just depends on what you can afford and what you have out here. But I do feel we are blessed to be in this Hollywood community as calibrators, because you have so many people in the industry that are aware of what calibration is and the importance of calibration, whether you work in VFX or you work on set or you work, and so that helps.
You don't have to sell it
into people's homes. You sell it less. You have to sell it less. There's also, there's also more competition out here than in some other cities to calibrate, right? But, so it all balances out, but you do have to sell it less for a lot of people.
I can only imagine, there's a team of people working on a movie or working on a TV show or something, and deadlines are really close, and they're all in there looking at things last minute, and just one guy goes, that red's not right. So is that like an emergency 911 call to you? Like, I've had a couple times where a couple customers have reached out to me after the calibration. They're like, I don't know certain things, but if you can come back Friday, that's fine. Are you in more of a fire drill type mode in those situations? Does that even happen often?
I feel as though when I was younger, it was more of a fire drill, because you just like, oh my gosh, what went wrong? Is this me? Is this my reputation? All that. Now, if and when that happens, and it doesn't happen all the time, it's, let's take a deep breath and let's go through this step 1, step 2, step 3, and let's make sure we have verified. Just yesterday morning, I had a studio that I calibrated recently. We did a bunch of LG OLEDs. They were swapping out displays. And so we did all these LG OLEDs in like their warehouse, and then they deployed them, I think, after we calibrated them. And the guy calls me up and he says, one of these looks terrible. It looks atrocious. And he sends me the serial number, and I send him his report again. I go, okay, here's a fresh report. Here's all the settings on page 2. Make sure you're in these settings. 1. 2, toggle your picture mode. Like every now and then with LG OLEDs, you may have seen this. You load a 3D LUT in, and for some reason it didn't load. So if you go to color gamut, you'll see it says wide or normal, and it's not grayed out. And when it's not grayed out, it means something went wrong. It didn't load that file. So if you just change from, let's say you're in cinema mode to game mode or vivid mode and back, it usually will load it. So that's, most of the time, that's the issue. Now they said, no, all the things are the right way. All the things are the right way. So I said, okay, can you tell me what's going on? What's your signal path? Well, it turns out they had an SDI to HDMI converter box.
Oh, sure.
It had a LUT in it from
in the box
previous
itself?
monitor. So someone who had calibrated that, I don't know who, the previous monitor used that converter box, and some of those you can load LUTs into, and it had some kind of LUT in it. And so as soon as they turned off the LUT, because we didn't need it, we calibrated the LG self-contained without an external LUT, as an intro LUT. It fixed it. And so I got an email back, it was the converter box. They had a LUT turned on. We turned it off. Thank goodness. Now, if we can't get to that point remotely, then yes, we'll have to come out and take a look at it. Sometimes, all we can do is say, these are the measurements to the specification. Let's check our gear. Let's check our process. Let's check our test pattern generator. Let's make sure everything's set up right. And that red is measuring where that red should be measuring. And if that red is measuring where that red should be measuring, at that point, it becomes, well, maybe you need to grade it a little bit differently. Like that's where we're at in this artistic process, right? So if we're in the grading suite and they're mastering the content, maybe you need to add a little more red saturation if that's what you're looking for. But it can also be the display falls short.
Yeah,
it really could be that the display falls short. We've had that issue with some products. There are products that don't always hit perfect blue.
Right.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of them. That's very common to not hit 150060. And so you'll have a broadcast monitor that hits perfect blue, a grade A monitor, and then you'll have a client monitor that might not hit perfect blue.
Right.
And they put up 100% saturated blue, and you look at it and you say, well, that blue shade is a little different than that blue shade. And you're like, yes, and it always will be.
And it will be forever. Yep.
And you just put your foot down and you say, let me explain you why, and let me show you the data. And you bring out your calibration reports and you show the charts and the data and you show the measurement. And you say, and this is why we're hitting the limitation of that. And what's really hard, we had this happen with a customer on a cinema projector that wasn't quite hitting P3 red. It was the Digital Cinema Initiative specification, I think, says it has to be within a delta. Don't quote me on this. It's either a delta 2 or a delta 3 of the target. It's all defined on what would be considered DCI compliant. And I want to say it's 2, delta E 2002, but I'd have to check.
Pretty small error either way.
Which pretty small error. Yeah. Now, but perceivable. For someone with, see it. They can see that. So it was falling short. And the client had this content with this red logo, and they're like, this red logo doesn't match the red logo we made and mastered. Well, it was mastered on a BVM X300.
Yeah.
So they're mastering it on this RGB OLED in HDR, and then we're at their home, tone mapping it, showing it on the barcode, doing everything we can, and sure enough, we're not hitting the quite red, and the director's like, hey, this isn't hitting it. And so we went back and we check everything and we say, yeah, it's not hitting it. We think this is it. It could be partially the tone mapping. It could be the fact that we're not quite hitting as far out on the red, and you're just very sensitive to that.
Sure.
And at that point, there's not a whole lot you can do, because if it can't hit it, it can't hit it. If the display can't do it, it can't do it. And then the question becomes, well, we bought this DCI projector, spent a lot of money on it. It says it's DCI. Why can't it hit DCI red? It can hit DCI red. It's in the tolerance.
Yep.
It's not. They didn't say it's dead on. They said it's compliant. It is compliant. So some of that stuff gets a little tricky, and then it gets frustrating for everybody involved. So
I would imagine too that you might run into a little bit of metamerism too, where somebody's saying, yeah, this red is wrong, but 4 other people in the room are like, no, it's right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the display metamerism, right? And then the observer side of it. So the display side of it, you're talking about the different spectral power distributions, the different types of display technology, and inherently not every shade of every color will look exactly the same, because you're not starting with the same inherent characteristics, right? So you might look at a shade of yellow and go, that yellow doesn't match that yellow. And it's like, but that red matches that red, and that green matches that green, but that yellow doesn't match that yellow. And you're like, well, yeah, these have grossly different spectral power distributions in that range. This one's weak and this one's strong. And so you're seeing that kind of shine through. Then you have the observer side of it, right? Where people sometimes just don't see the same. We'll bring in people where we have 2 displays, calibrated, client monitor, hero monitor, and they'll look at white or grayscale, and I might think it looks like spot on. I'm so proud of myself. And then somebody comes in and goes, don't you think it's a little warm?
Yeah.
And I'll be like, no, I don't.
No.
Warm, right? And then or blue or green. And then we step back, and ultimately it's whoever works in that room, right? You need to have parity for the artist, the colorist.
Right.
Because the colorist is the only one really staring at that hero monitor, and they need to have parity where the client's going to come in, look at the client monitor, and when they say, I want it to look a little warmer, the colorist doesn't go, I know you feel it should look a little warmer on that monitor, but come back around to my desk.
Come look at this one. Sure.
Because then the confidence is gone.
Right.
Then it's like, well, why am I even looking at the monitor on the wall if you want me to look at this one? And all of a sudden the confidence is gone. So if the colorist has enough security in looking at their grading monitor and the client monitor and saying, these are so close, they're so in sync, that when someone tells me it needs to be a little brighter or the black's a little crushed and I need to adjust my color grade, that it matches between the monitors, that's where they're happy with it. So it really doesn't matter what you or me or anyone else really thinks in those rooms, but they do like to bring in their buddies. Like color 1 will bring in color 2 and go, hey buddy, look at this, what do you think? And then they'll say, well, we don't agree. And I've been in facilities where they go, oh, Mike always thinks it's red.
Yeah.
He's the only one here. He always says
He
everything's
always says
red,
that. Yeah.
and all of us just ignore him.
Yeah.
And the other colorists are pretty much in sync with the one guy. And then there's places that they now make you take color tests just to work.
That makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of studios now. They make you go see a doctor and take a color, test and get your beauty.
Have you seen those videos on YouTube of like the employees at like Pantone who have to take that yearly color check, and they're looking at two swatches that, I mean, of course you're looking at it on a laptop screen through a camera over YouTube, but you're looking at the swatches, and just from what you're seeing, you're like, those are exactly the same. And the guy or girl who's been doing it for 50 years goes, nope, this one's a little off. And you're like, how the heck do you see that? That's cool to me. I love that.
That's what they want to see. They want to see how many different shades can you see and whatnot. But everyone is a little different, and that's the problem. Sure. There's the standard observer model, and they do research to try to find the standard observer. What is the average of a group of people, and how do they perceive things? But everyone does see things a little different, and then that becomes another difficulty of calibration when you're trying to fight with that. I think as a calibrator, starting with the science, starting with the meters, starting with accurate equipment and quality equipment to quantify it without your eye really helps to get you that good foundation. And then from there, you kind of interject that metameric difference into it, either before or after. You can, ideally you'd work with it before, where you'd get a colorist with you and you'd say, okay, what are the differences you see here? And you'd put them through kind of a test between the two monitors, and you'd build your color model for calibrating to match the monitors beforehand. But that's very difficult because, again, we're talking about that time and money. So to have a colorist come into the studio to spend an hour with me before I spend 5 or 6 or 7 hours calibrating the room, and then have to come back, their bosses go, wait, I got to pay him to come in the morning, then I got to pay him to come back in the evening. That's a larger cost to me. Can't we just have him come in the evening? And that happens regularly. They don't like to do that. Again, it's trying to work with those ways. So then we think, well, how can we make it better? So when we're done, we can make these adjustments more easily if we have to do that.
Dave, I've got one more question for you. We're right at the hour now. Guys, if you're listening in and you want to toss Dave a question, feel free to use that question box. We'll spend a couple minutes here if you have any questions for him. I wanted to touch on one last thing with you, Dave, being that you're a professional who does this every single day. We talk a lot about the maintenance on our own gear. So, sending in the spectral device once a year. I'm doing profiling and stuff like that. But I've come across some situations before where somebody had a system calibrated. It turns out that that meter hadn't been recalibrated in like 5 years. So, as a professional who does this every day, what are you doing to keep up the maintenance with your gear and your kit and all your stuff?
So this sort of becomes the beauty of having a lot of gear. Because we have 2 CR300s right now, 2 CR100s right now, and then I actually bought, it's on a shelf in the back here. Guillermo at Colorimetry Research sells a reference wavelength emitter. I forget what he calls it exactly, but essentially it's a box. It warms up and emits like a single wavelength of light. I think it's 540 nanometers. And he has in his Colorimetry Research application a test. So you put the meter on the tripod and you put the light there and you line them up in the cavity, and then you measure, and it'll tell you if your wavelength is measuring intolerance. So we do that test every now and then. Now, it isn't the end all test, right? So it's not going to tell you if your luminance is out, but it will tell you if your color is out, right? If your wavelength is not measuring where it should, like that would mean like the diffractor might have shifted, or you might have some inherent problem inside the meter. So we do test that maybe every 6 months or so. I'll check that. We do get them calibrated and maintenance every year anyway. I'm a big proponent of that, and I'm very lucky they're in Santa Clarita here. So they're not very far away. I mean, LA traffic could be an hour and a half, but today it'll probably be 30 minutes. But then we can also compare to each other. So
that's good.
If something's wrong, I can pull out the second CR300 or at some point and say, let me shoot the same stuff with these two and see if they are in alignment with each other. Because if they've both been calibrated and they both are still in sync, odds are they haven't shifted very much. But again, I still bring them in about once a year for updates, whatever maintenance they have to do on them, clean them, check the shutters, all that.
I got a call from another calibrator last night, and he said, I'm reading with my Jetty and I'm reading with my i1 Pro 2, and I'm getting 2 different luminance readings. can you check with your Jetty and your i1 Pro 2 sometime tomorrow, meaning today? I was like, sure, no problem. So, I'm a big proponent of this. I've had my Jetty now for a little over a year. I just sent it back to Germany to get recalibrated. I've just been following the manufacturer specifications. If they say once a year, I'm going to send it in once a year. But that's cool that you have that specific test with the CR. So at least it's at least in the ballpark. That's a really cool feature.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a little bit of peace of mind,
Sure,
but
sure.
we're always checking it. And we have studios, like I said, some of these studios have, for the DCI products, they have their own meters.
Right.
So when we're there, the number one question, if they have their own meters, can we compare our meter to yours to make sure that you're calibrating it to the same as ours? And we've actually found issues with some manufacturers' meters. There's one studio had a number of meters, and what we did is we shot with ours and we shot with their meter, and it was in sync. And then they said, well, let's pull out this other one, right? Because they had a couple of them. And we started to find out that only like 5 meters, only 2 of them were properly calibrated. And what was funny was the 3 new ones were recently calibrated, the ones that were out of whack.
Right.
And so you can actually get differences from the reference light sources, right, of when they were calibrated. So, these manufacturers are using a lamp and an engraved sphere. And depending on where you are in that lamp's life, you could have a slight shift.
Sure.
And so that's what we assumed happened with talking to the manufacturers, that they basically, mine was calibrated probably with a similar lamp. It was different manufacturers too. They were calibrated with a similar lamp, similar situation. They were in sync, but then these new ones were maybe calibrated with just a slightly different lamp or slightly different fluctuation that had, a little more than you'd like. So if we're talking tolerance of 002, they might have been something like 0035.
Yeah.
Nothing that you'd like cry about, but you start to question. These are very expensive.
Yeah. Sure.
That 0015 extra error, what's up with that?
Especially doing studio work like what you're doing. I mean, those types of customers like demand and absolutely deserve the most accuracy as possible. I mean, they're the ones making the TV shows and movies that we all love. So, where it might not be, it might not be a huge deal in a residential system, but in a studio system, it's everything. It's everything.
Exactly.
That's cool. Well, Dave, man, I could talk to you for hours, man. I appreciate the time today. The hour just blew by, which it tends to when I talk to you. Guys, I didn't see any other questions come into the question box, so thank you so much for listening. Dave, any final words for anybody who's listening?
No. Thanks for having me, Jason. It was great. It's always great talking to you. I appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone has any questions, they can email me at david@avocal.com.
Yep, great. And guys, I'm Jason at avproglobal.com. So if you have any questions, feel free, field them through me, send them straight to Dave, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. Dave, enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, you too.
Cool, thanks.
Right.